And we start right now with a Fox News alert as we await word of possible new sanctions against Russia. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Nauert. The Obama administration could announce any new measures any moment now, sanctions aimed to punish Moscow and possibly President Vladimir Putin himself for hacking that the U.S. intelligence community says aimed to help Donald Trump win the White House. Our White House correspondent Kevin Corke is traveling with the president today. He's live for us in Honolulu with the latest. Kevin, good afternoon to you. When are we going to know about any possible retaliation from the United States on Russia?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm going to give you a little bit of inside baseball while we have just a moment. If I were to ask that question to a senior administration official, and I heard back right away, generally it means that they're working on it, nothing's percolating immediately. If it takes them a long time to get back to me, usually that means something is about to happen. Something could be imminent at that particular time. I can tell you already today, I've heard back from them pretty quickly. So anecdotally speaking, I don't expect anything to break within the hour. Of course, that could all change. But what I can tell you is they are blaming Vladimir Putin for the leaks. They're saying he was the guy who had to be behind this because it came from Russia. The Russians were leaking details about John Podesta's emails and the DNC. And so the feeling is among the 17 intelligence agencies here in the States that that had an impact on the U.S. election. But critics are saying this is just basically political grandstanding, this idea of sanctions on the way out the door. In fact, as for Herman Cain, he says it's probably not going to have much of an impact on Vladimir Putin.
Zero. We have a new sheriff in town. His name is Donald J. Trump. Obama is trying to go out with some hyperbole. Mr. Tough Guy, after 8 years of Vladimir Putin kicking him around and basically embarrassing this nation, he's now trying to go out with some hyperbole. That's all.
Okay, so to King's point, why not let the next administration make the call on sanctions? I mean, after all, the president will be out of office in just a couple of weeks. But then again, Democrats will say, look, guy's on the job until January 20th, and he should act accordingly, and that includes the right to call for more sanctions. And they, as you point out, appear to be imminent. Maybe not within the hour, but we do know, that, based on our reporting, that they are coming at some point. Heather?
Okay, they're coming at some point. So what are Republican lawmakers saying about those possible sanctions and the criticism that President Obama is trying to force the Trump administration into a tough relationship with Russia?
Great question. I'm going to tackle this in two ways. On the back end, first of all, yeah, they're saying that's true. We do know that that's what the Obama administration is trying to do because they know that if for some reason they make these sanctions and Donald Trump sort of says, yeah, we don't want to continue with them, it makes him look like a puppet, right? So that's sort of the idea. But if he sticks with it, it can make things more difficult between the U.S. and Russia. As for the first part, well, they're wondering what they might be able to do structurally in terms of undoing anything that the president does. But even that is politically challenging for the GOP because naturally we all want to know whether or not this is something that you want to deter in the future. One more thing I should point out, Heather, and I think this is important. We don't know what the outward look will be like, and we don't know what the inward look will be like. What I mean by that is sanctions or the outward manifestation of some sort of a punishment. The interior view is what happens on the cyber end. We simply don't know, and we'll have to watch that very carefully. Heather?
Kevin, while you were just giving that report right there, we've got some news over our internal wires that the U.S. may be close to closing 2 Russian compounds here in the United States, one in Maryland and one in the state of New York. The second piece of information is that we could be set to expel Russian diplomats from the United States. That information just coming in. We'll let Kevin check his sources. Kevin, if you could check your sources on what you're getting on that and get back to us.
I can tell you really quickly before we go, yes, and I'm watching this as it comes in, and this is part and parcel of what we talked about earlier. I can just tell you that what I'm getting from my White House sources, this is consistent with what they were talking about, and when they say it could happen, it's still coming across as it could happen. They are planning this. They're sort of letting you sort of read the tea leaves right now, Heather, but it has not happened yet. And if it does happen within the hour, that would be really big news, and I'll let you know if they're going to make an announcement anytime in the next few minutes. Back to you for now.
Just one possible way to potentially punish the Russians for those actions. Kevin, let us know what you find out. Thank you. Well, President-elect Donald Trump reacting to Secretary of State John Kerry's rebuke of Israel today, saying that Israel is being treated unfairly and that the countries should be reprimanded never are. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Nauert. That already strained relationship between Israel and the Obama administration may be close to the breaking point after Secretary Kerry's speech condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank and calling Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister's government, extreme. Netanyahu did not take kindly to that, issuing a blistering response. Rich Edson joins us live from the State Department with what Israelis and Palestinians are now saying today. Hi, Rich.
Good afternoon, Heather. And shortly after Secretary of State John Kerry spoke, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, offered an equally strong response to Kerry. He says he doesn't need to be lectured on peace by foreign leaders. He says Secretary Kerry focused way too much on criticizing Israel, and he says that's because Palestinians are a pediment to peace.
How can you make peace with someone who rejects your very existence? This conflict is, and has always been, about Israel's very right to exist.
Kerry says the settlement construction is only one of many impediments to peace. He did call out the Palestinians for what he says was essentially glorifying terrorists by naming streets and public squares after them. Still, most of his speech focused on condemning Israel for its construction of settlements. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, also charged the United States was behind that UN Security Council resolution, not just abstaining for voting for or against it and letting it go through, but also coordinating and orchestrating it. That's something that the State Department denies. As for the Palestinians, they came out with a response to all this. The president of the Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas, says that he is ready to restart peace negotiations so long as Israel halts its settlement construction. Heather?
Okay, we'll see about that. Rich Edson, live for us at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Well, the administration's decision to abstain from the UN vote condemning Israel receiving bipartisan criticism. Some Democrats as well as Republicans accusing President Obama of turning his back on an ally.
We join the crowd beating up on Israel, and it's really disingenuous to say, well, we abstained. Well, we abstained knowing full well what that abstention meant. It meant that the resolution would pass, and Israel relies on us to block all these resolutions against them because they can't get a fair shake.
Well, that was Congressman Eliot Engel earlier this morning. He's a Democrat from Maryland. Bipartisan criticism. Joining me right now, Wisconsin Congressman Sean Duffy. He's a member of the Trump Executive Transition Committee. Thank you for joining us. So we've seen that kind of criticism coming down. What can the U.S. Congress and what can the incoming administration now do to better repair our relationship with Israel?
Well, listen, I think it's pretty clear that both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, have been joined at the hip on this issue, that we traditionally stand with Israel. And I think it's the acts that we take in Congress with the next administration that shows, again, we support Israel and we do support peace. But, Heather, this comes back to the point of what is Obama trying to accomplish? What is the UN trying to accomplish? They're trying to get to a place of peace. And to fully focus on Israeli settlements as the impediment to peace, as Benjamin Netanyahu just mentioned, isn't the real problem. The problem is the fact that the Palestinians won't come to the negotiating table to sit down with Israel, number one. And number two, they won't recognize a Jewish state. If you can get by those two cornerstones, you can have the two sit down and talk about what do the landlines look like. Israel said, we'll negotiate that, we'll talk about that, but you can't get to that point until the Palestinians come to the table.
Yeah, as Rich Edson was just reporting, the Palestinians now say that if Israelis stop building, then they will come to the table and talk about peace. But not sure that that is really going to work. I'm just curious, since you're a sitting member of Congress and you're constantly talking with the new administration coming in, what specifically is Congress willing to do to help give Israel some assurances that they're going to be all right?
Well, I think public statements that have been made by Donald Trump give assurances. You've seen some affectionate tweets go back and forth between Trump and Bibi Netanyahu. And I think it's heartening for Israel to see both Republicans and Democrats coming together and standing with Israel. But back to your last point, that if the Palestinians say if Israel would just stop building settlements, we'll come to the table to negotiate. That actually happened 7 years ago. Barack Obama was able to get Israel for 10 months to stop building settlements in the hopes that the Palestinians would come to the negotiating table. So Israel stopped for 10 months, and guess what? the Palestinians didn't come to negotiate at the table. So I think if you're going to have peace, it's not going to come from the United States. It's not going to come from the UN. It's going to come from the Palestinians and the Israelis sitting down together and negotiating and talking and coming up with a resolution. But I think what Israel has to understand today is that there will be a new government on January 20th, and it's a government that supports Israel and its right to exist.
Well, I'm just wondering if going forward we're willing to do anything at the UN, such as stop any new resolutions that would be harmful to Israel, if we could make that pledge, or if Congress would make a pledge of not essentially approving or giving a thumbs up to statehood until both parties are willing to peacefully cooperate. But go right ahead, and then I want to quickly ask you about Russia.
Yeah, so quickly, we do have one of my fellow congressmen, Louis Gohmert, who's bringing up a bill that will say, listen, why are we going to pay for a quarter of the funding of the UN, $3 billion a year, when they're anti-Israel, anti-Semitic? Maybe we have to talk about removing our funding from the UN until they withdraw this resolution.
And would you support that?
I want to see the I want to see the bill first, but it's something I can support. But I want to look at it when it comes out from Louis.
Okay, and it was just breaking as we started this hour about 10 minutes ago that there are new reports that the United States is expelling 35 Russian diplomats in 2 closed compounds in New York and in Maryland in response to the campaign harassment by Russia against American diplomats in Moscow and what they had to do with our election here, the 2016 presidential election. What is your reaction to that, kicking out those diplomats?
Lo and behold, Barack Obama now has, what, a backbone to stand up against Russia. Maybe in the last 23 days he's going to stand up against China as well. Listen, Heather, this is not about Russia's impact on our election. Both Republicans and Democrats said we want to do an investigation, we want to look at what their involvement was, and we want to hold Russia to account. But what this right now reeks of is politics from Barack Obama. His initiatives, his priorities were on the ballot with Hillary Clinton, and he lost in a huge way last November. And so now he's trying to divert attention away from that loss and try to blame it on Fox News. He's trying to blame it on the Russians and fake news. He's trying to find every scapegoat except looking internally and at his party and at his priorities about what went wrong with the American people in this last election. And again, this is about legacy more so than it is about the Russians. And by the way, Heather, if you want to have an impact with sanctions on Russia, let the next administration do it. We're 23 days away. Hold off and let Donald Trump and the new Congress come together and hold Russia to account. Don't do this as you're walking out the door, Barack Obama.
Got it. Congressman Sean Duffy from Wisconsin. Yeah. Congressman, thank you so much. Well, the world, welcome back. It is now 1:15. A short while ago, we brought you some breaking news about sanctions against Russia, and some of that breaking news we're going to check in with our Kevin Corke, who is traveling with the president. We're getting some reaction now from the White House about a report that 35 Russian diplomats could be getting kicked out of the United States. Kevin, what can you tell us?
Yeah, it's actually broader than that. And what we wanted to be careful about was trying this idea of removing diplomatic staff from one nation because you have to be careful. Clearly, that could have been a story in and of itself. We have heard about diplomatic harassment of American diplomats abroad, and so that in and of itself was not necessarily declarative. What we can tell you, however, is you're right. This is all part and parcel to a larger issue, also accusing the Russian government of cyber hacking. I'm going to read part of the president's statement, and it reads this way. Today, I have ordered a number of actions in response to the Russian government's aggressive harassment of U.S. officials and cyber operations aimed at the U.S. election. These actions follow repeated private and public warnings that we have issued to the Russian government and are unnecessary and appropriate response to efforts to harm U.S. interests in violation of established international norms of behavior. And it goes on to say, and it's fairly lengthy, and I won't read it all to you, but I can tell you this. It talks at great length about some of the ideas that the Russians, at the very highest level of Russian government, were behind the cyber attacks that impacted the U.S. election in 2016. And as Reuters has been reported, and as our Lucas Tomlinson and others, Matt Dean and our staff have been confirming, that means a number of Russian diplomats will be moving on from American facilities, or facilities based here in America, including one in New York and one in Maryland, we are told, that will be shuttered. We'll keep following this story for you, Heather, as I continue to hear from senior administration officials. I'll pass it along to you. But for now, back to you.
All right, Kevin, do we know what kind of facilities these are? You mentioned ones in New York and Maryland. Are these some of the like weekend camps that they sometimes have, or are these sort of consulate-type buildings?
Yeah, you're right on the money. These annexes are typically not utilized on a daily basis, but they certainly can be. When you talk about camps, in case people have not seen these or they maybe have driven by and didn't know exactly what they were, often these encampments are for high-level dignitaries who come into town. It's not the same as a consulate per se, but these are major facilities, and it sends a very strong and declarative message to the Russian government that cyber attacks, especially those that impact our infrastructure, in this case the American election, won't be tolerated.
Yeah, and Kevin, I understand that it may be premature to ask this question, but I'll ask you anyway since we do have you. The people who are intended to be kicked out, do we know if they had any involvement with this hacking?
Great question. I've been in constant consultation with senior administration officials at the very highest level. And while they're very cautious not to say that is the case, I can tell you just based on conversations I've had, it is not a surprise if they do feel that way, although I've yet to confirm that. Heather?
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, Kevin Corke, we'll check in with you as news warrants. Thanks for that great reporting that broke just at the top of this hour. Well, a flurry of activity as the Trump transition team prepares for the inauguration just 22 days away from now. Peter Doocy is live for us in Palm Beach, Florida, with an update that officials have given him today about the transition. Peter, what can you tell us?
Heather, the last update that we got from transition officials, even though it was just a little while ago, was while the Obama administration was still preparing to punish Russian diplomats or punish the Russian government for their involvement, allegedly, in interfering with the election. And an official said that anybody still focusing on hacking, they think, is just trying to delegitimize Mr. Trump's victory, and that the president-elect is going to keep being skeptical about their involvement until evidence was made public linking Moscow to the alleged interference. So it sounds like between the time that call was made this morning with reporters and this news from the White House, things may be changing. There was also some follow-up to the phone call that President Obama placed to Mr. Trump down here at Mar-a-Lago yesterday. Officials say they were talking about inaugural activities and about the transition. As for today's schedule, it's just on campus at Mar-a-Lago for meetings with senior staffers. Heather.
All right, Peter. So do we know how dramatically the president-elect plans to reform the Department of Veterans Affairs? We've heard about a public-private partnership of sorts. What can you tell us?
Right. If that option is what they decide to follow through with, then the reforms that they are considering are pretty dramatic because that public-private option would basically blow the entire system up. Mr. Trump is looking at public-private. A transition official told reporters last night that some veterans have injuries that are just best treated using the infrastructure that's at VA hospitals, but not everybody is. And so here's a quote from that official that was passed along by the press pool last night. Obviously, some of the vets love the VA, and some want the ability to go out to a doctor that they choose. So it's not an easy solution. It's a big, complicated department that needs a lot of attention and innovation. That revelation about the public-private option being a possibility came after the president-elect spent most of the afternoon yesterday meeting with executives from some of America's best hospital groups like Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic. And we did get some clarity this morning as well about why nobody has been nominated to be the next VA secretary yet. The officials are telling us the president-elect just wants to make sure that he picks the right person to make some of those very complicated changes that he's considering.
It's certainly a lot to handle, but wouldn't it be terrific if they had facilities inside the Mayo Clinic and some of the best respected institutions in the United States? That's certainly what our veterans deserve. Peter Doocy, thanks for joining us out of Florida today. Well, just in time for the New Year's celebration, a winter storm is about to batter New England. Will it clear out before the weekend? Your New Year's forecast for the eve, that's coming up next. And regardless of the weather, the NYPD says it is prepared for the enormous crowd expected at Times Square, deploying what it calls extraordinary assets. We'll look at just how extraordinary it is. That's ahead.
A lot you will see, and as per usual, a lot you will not see. And that's that combination that keeps us safe, and that's what the NYPD has really perfected.
A nationwide ceasefire set to take effect just hours from now in war-torn Syria. At midnight local time, Turkey and Russia brokering the deal with an estimated 60,000 rebel fighters. ISIS and al-Qaeda not a part of that truce. Well, Russia says the U.S. is welcome to join the peace talks once President-elect Donald Trump takes office. The State Department calling the news a, quote, positive development and saying in a statement, quote, there is no military solution to this nearly 6-year crisis. The international community hopes the ceasefire will hold so a Syrian-led transition toward a more representative, united, and peaceful government can begin. We hope that helps. So what will the weather be like on New Year's Eve? Our chief meteorologist, Rick Reichmuth, is in the Fox Weather Center. Hi, Rick. So how are we looking?
You know what? Really not that bad. We have the storm that we're dealing with across the Northeast. That'll all be out of here by the time we get towards Saturday night into Sunday. Officially Times Square. How about 38 degrees? That is not bad. It's a little bit above average for this time of year, and we should be dry, so not looking really bad at all. We do have this storm out there right now, and with that we have winter storm warnings in effect all across parts of western Mass, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. It's really an inland event. Coastal areas are going to be all rain, maybe a little bit of snow flying at the end, but nothing that will cause problems. All the accumulation is going to be across interior sections. Snow also across the central spine here of the central Appalachians. But here's a storm right now. We had very big rain and storms move through the south overnight. Now the worst of it is across parts of the Northeast where we have the heavy rain and then the snow across interior sections. It is going to continue on throughout tonight. This is the future radar. Take a look at, here we go throughout the overnight hours. Really kind of winding up here. That's 11 p.m., mostly in across parts of New Hampshire and Maine. And by the time we get towards middle of the day tomorrow, most of the storm is gone. What will be in its wake, though, is a lot of wind along with that snow that's on the ground. So we'll see some of that blowing, causing some poor visibility, certainly. And the windy conditions tomorrow are going to be really extreme and will likely cause some big impacts across the airports in the Northeast. It actually gets really going overnight tonight across parts of coastal areas of Maine. The good part is it's so far to the north that the worst of that kind of strengthening storm is going to be across far eastern Maine and then up in across parts of Canada. But we will certainly have a breezy day for the day tomorrow. Temperature-wise, here we go. We have not been super cold for about the last week and a half. And take a look at what happens all the way. Here's New Year's Eve. Everybody looking pretty good temperature-wise. But watch what happens New Year's Day. And then into Monday, Heather, the cold air returns back across parts of the west. It looks like we might see a new batch of some cold air coming in across the lower 48. But when you get that, take a look at this. 63 in Louisville for the start of the new year. Not looking bad.
Wow, spring-like temperatures there. Well, where it's cold, we'll just be inside watching football anyway, so that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rick Reichmuth, thank you so much.
You bet.
We're getting some breaking news in from the White House at this hour. The Obama administration just announcing new sanctions against Russia, among them giving the boot to 35 Russian operatives currently in the United States. Plus, we'll have this, a new way to get your online order sent by airmail. A Fox News alert on a very busy news day. The Obama administration making good on its vow to retaliate against Russia for hacking, issuing a set of 9 different sanctions. The Treasury Secretary has now designated 2 Russian individuals for using cyber-enabled means. 35 Russian operatives have now been ordered to leave the United States. 2 diplomatic compounds related to Russian intelligence gathering, we are told, are now being closed. One is in Maryland and one is in New York. They'll be shuttered at noon tomorrow. The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI releasing declassified technology information on Russian civilian and military intelligence. That's the latest news that we're getting in on this matter. Let's talk with Guy Benson. He's a political editor of townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. And Brad Bauman is a Democratic strategist and a partner at the Pastorum Group. He's the former executive director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Let's start with you, Brad. What do you think about this idea that the administration is now issuing these sanctions against the Russians? We knew that this might happen, but is it appropriate for them to do it just 3 weeks before Donald Trump comes into office?
Absolutely, it's appropriate, and this is a strong response, and I want to thank President Obama and the administration for taking these necessary steps. We've been saying all along that Russia has attempted to influence the American people, have attempted to manipulate us, and this goes well beyond the stated and normal ways in which intelligence is conducted around the world.
All right.
So I do believe it's appropriate.
All right, so Guy, you know, it sounds like a big deal, expelling 35 diplomats and closing down 2 of these residential compounds, which, by the way, is kind of where these folks just go on the weekend if they want a cushy place to lay their head or something. But are they handcuffing the next administration? Is the point to handcuff the Donald Trump administration into having sort of a tougher relationship with Russia from the get-go?
I don't necessarily think so. I believe it's appropriate for the current president to take action. The Russians did not hack the election, but they did try to influence it, according to our intelligence agencies. That's not acceptable. No American should countenance that. And so the administration is doing something, although I'm not really sure that this would be a very strong response. Yes, it's a big move publicly. There's some PR here. But I just saw our colleague here at Fox News, Julie Rodzinski, who, of course, is a liberal Democrat. She called this move by the administration weak and said it didn't go after Putin or his inner circle. So sort of a slap on the wrist. I guess better than nothing, but not exactly tough stuff.
Okay. So, again, we're just getting in this information, so it may be incomplete at this time. I want to caution folks right now. But one of the things that we had heard about was the potential that the U.S. could cyber attack Russia or do something stronger, such as go after Vladimir Putin and his finances. Brad, what do you think about that idea? Should we have done something stronger instead?
Well, let's be clear that these measures are being done in concert with 2 years of sanctions that we've already imposed on Russia, which have affected
that certainly did not stop them from trying to interfere with our election.
That's absolutely correct. It did not stop them, but it is hurting them, and it is hurting Putin, and that's one of the reasons why he did this. So, given the fact that this is being done in concert with that, I think it's fair to say that this is, in fact, an escalation. And yes, if you ask me, I do believe that there is room to do more and that we should be doing more.
Okay, let's go on to Middle East peace. We're going to try to solve all the world's problems in this hour today. From Middle East peace to dealing with Russia, Secretary of State John Kerry's speech on that very issue yesterday got some sharp reaction on Capitol Hill and around the world as well. Secretary Kerry inflaming tensions, taking aim at Israeli settlements, and also Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Listen to this.
His current coalition is the most right-wing in Israeli history, with an agenda driven by the most extreme elements. The result is that policies of this government, which the Prime Minister himself just described as more committed to settlements than any in Israel's history, are leading in the opposite direction. They're leading towards one state.
Brad, as a Democrat, I want to come back to you on this. A lot of Americans were taken aback by the UN vote and also Secretary Kerry's speech. In Secretary Kerry's speech, if we can put that back up on the screen, we saw that he only mentioned Hamas 4 times. He mentioned occupation by the Israelis 14 times, settlements 42 times. Were Democrats surprised by the firestorm in so many Americans and folks overseas calling all of this anti-Israeli?
So I'm not just going to speak as a Democrat, but also as a Jewish American with a deep, abiding commitment to the state of Israel. I believe that what John Kerry spoke yesterday was truth to power.
Truth
and that
to
it was
power.
very important.
Hamas,
yes, and I
so
feel
you believe that Hamas is a militant group then, as he referred to it, and not a terror group, as the State Department actually calls it?
I believe that when best friends have a fight, that it is our duty to speak truthfully and honestly
about that fight. So it's the truth, in your opinion, that Hamas is merely a militant group and not a terror group, even though it encourages the killing of Israeli civilians?
The truth is that it's a terrorist group, but the truth is also that the settlement policy of the current administration under Netanyahu is a disaster for world peace, it's a disaster for American security, and it's a disaster for Israeli security.
Guy, do you believe that this is a disaster for world peace?
No, the disaster for world peace is the Palestinians and Hamas refusing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, refusing to lay down arms, and refusing to stop saying they want to destroy the state of Israel. That's point one. Point two, Kerry was there talking about, this is the most right-wing, hardline Israeli administration in history. Well, maybe Israeli voters took a harder line because they suspected that this administration, the Obama administration, wouldn't have their back. And guess what? They've been vindicated in that fear. And the last point I would make, as you listen to that speech from John Kerry, which was very long-winded, he mentions settlements
endlessly. This is a bizarre obsession because Israel unilaterally pulled out of all of their settlements in Gaza 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And what did Israel get in response for that good faith gesture on settlements? They got Hamas elected in Gaza and rockets fired at their civilians for years.
We're going to have to leave it there. Guy Benson and Brad Bauman, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us about Russia and also Israel. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, it is a bird, it's a plane, it's a floating warehouse. The retail giant Amazon winning a patent for an airship that could quickly dispatch drones delivering goods that you buy online in just minutes. How on earth would this thing work? Well, Nicole Petalides is live on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, who's going to explain all this. Nicole, what is it?
Well, Heather, this is the wave of the future for everybody who loves Amazon and Amazon products. Well, it turns out this will be a mothership. It will be like a blimp flying 45,000 feet in the air with Amazon products. This will be an airborne fulfillment center, and these are the lingos that we're also going to use. AFC, Airborne Fulfillment Center. And what happens are the drones, the UAVs, that's unmanned aerial vehicles, will leave from this big mothership with your goods and bring them right to you. What else happens on this mothership? Well, shuttles, these smaller airships, will ferry goods back and forth to the mothership. This will just help Amazon to continue to be the behemoth that it is. What's interesting is it can, while it hovers at around 45,000 feet, it can actually lower to a stadium, say the Meadowlands or whatever. You're at the Giants-Jets game and you want some paraphernalia, or you're at the Super Bowl and you want some of the team shirts. You can actually order on Amazon and a drone will deliver your product to you. This is the wave of the future. They've filed for the patents for this, and this is something I guess that people who are very hot on Amazon have something to look forward to out there.
I guess so. I just don't want those things dropping out of the sky and dropping on my house or my kid or
You're
something.
not wrong. There's a lot of concern about what could happen with all of this.
All right. And lastly, tell us about mortgage rates. Now maybe the time to lock in?
Yeah, it's very interesting because we've seen mortgage rates on the rise. In fact, 9 straight weeks we've seen mortgage rates going up. That only happened one other time in 31 years. I will note that this week we're at 4.32%. A year ago, 4.15%. 1990, 10%. So it just still shows you we're relatively low at the current rates that we are. In fact, a buyer would probably pay about $21 more per month at the current rate than they did a year ago. So these are incremental rises. The Fed raised rates only twice in the last decade and is likely to do a few rate hikes in 2017. But again, these are still very low rates. The experts say that you get in, you lock it in. These are still low rates historically. And while home prices have been on the rise, the supply is still relatively thin and the demand is hot. So that really puts pressure. Can't raise those prices too much. Otherwise, you won't have anybody buying your home. So go ahead and lock it in. Go ahead, buy that house.
I love how you're looking out for our money. Nicole, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you again soon. Well, the brother of the murdered child beauty queen, JonBenét Ramsey, now suing CBS Network, arguing that it falsely implicated him in his sister's death many years ago. We'll talk about whether or not he has a case against the company.
Following the U.S. response to Russia for interfering with our elections, we'll have the latest on the White House's moves and what they mean going forward. Plus, it seems President Obama is in a bit of a power struggle with his successor, President-elect Trump. What does that mean for the transition? Insight on that coming up when I fill in on Shepard Smith reporting.
New developments in the JonBenét Ramsey case. Her brother, Burke Ramsey, is now suing CBS and others for $750 million. He argues that the network's special, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, ignored evidence and falsely blamed him for the little girl's death. The 6-year-old beauty queen was found murdered in her family's basement back in 1996. Well, before the special aired, Burke Ramsey spoke to Dr. Phil on his TV show. Here's a clip.
For a long time, the media basically made our lives crazy. It's hard to miss the cameras and news trucks in your front yard, and we'd go to the supermarket sometimes and there'd be a tabloid, you know, with my picture, JonBenét's picture, plastered on the front. So I was pretty skeptical of like any sort of media. Like it just made me a very private person. As to why I'm doing it now, it's the 20th anniversary and there's apparently still a lot of attention around it.
Yeah, he was just 9 years old when his little sister was killed, and he has stayed silent for all of these years. Well, that new lawsuit against CBS claims, quote, CBS perpetrated a fraud upon the public instead of being a documentary based on a new investigation by so-called team of experts. The case of JonBenét Ramsey was a fictional crime show based primarily on preconceived storyline, scripted and self-published, and commercially unsuccessful book, Foreign Faction, written by one of the defendants, James Kohler, and then published in 2012. So let's bring in our panel of attorneys, Jennifer Brandt and Eric Guster. Eric, let's start with you. That $750 million lawsuit against the company. Does Burke Ramsey have a case?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because he has to prove that he did not commit a murder. Now, he may have a claim against CBS, but this is the issue, Heather. He has to prove that he is not the murderer. Because anytime you have a defamation case, a defamation lawsuit, you have the burden of proof to prove that they lied. Anyone can file a lawsuit against someone for saying anything about them, but it's on the burden's on you for you to determine this person is lying and I'm going to prove it.
Okay, let's go to Jennifer. Jennifer, do you agree with what he's saying?
I agree with Eric. I think this case does turn on truth because that's a defense to defamation. But also, it's a question of whether Burke is a public figure. I mean, he has been out in the press. He has gained notoriety by his involvement in this case, whether by choice or by not choice, just being part of the family, and the fact that he gave an interview. So that's another issue. And the third issue is what was stated, was that an opinion? Because opinion is also a defense in a defamation case.
Okay.
And if it was just someone stating their opinion, then there may not be a case.
But part of what goes into a defamation case is a willing disregard for the truth. And part of the truth is that he was exonerated, at least his lawsuit against CBS says, by Boulder Police and the district attorney, exonerated before, during, and after the grand jury investigation. So does that make CBS's claims in this case a lie?
Heck no. It does not make it a lie. O.J. was exonerated by a jury, but I don't know many people who think he's actually innocent. So you have a case like this where just because the police did not find him at fault does not necessarily mean that he's innocent of this case.
Okay, Jennifer, hold on one second because I want to show folks a clip of the CBS piece and then get your reaction. Let's take a look here.
Because there's so much controversy about whether or not a child is actually capable of creating the defect in the skull, we thought it would be good if we actually brought in a child who was about 10 years old. Are you ready?
Yep. Okay.
We'll just take it off here. We're just going to peel this back, and you can see how it's broken. It's very similar to the type of break that we saw on JonBenét.
Jennifer, that was a little boy who was brought in to essentially play the role of Burke right there. What do you think of that, and whether or not that is accurate or not?
Well, again, it goes to the issue of opinion. It's someone's thought about what could have possibly happened. They didn't outright accuse him, and again, we don't know who
well, it's
committed
pretty clear when
the murder.
when they bring in a boy of similar age, of similar appearance, and then the host repeatedly asks the question. The blonde lady does. So even a small child, even a young child, could have made this kind of injury on JonBenét Ramsey, and then the investigators go on to say yes, yes, yes.
Certainly, and that's why Burke obviously filed the lawsuit, because he's saying, well, look, it's clearly, they're clearly pointing the finger at me wrongly because I've been exonerated from this crime. But we really don't know what the truth is and who committed this murder. And so these other issues, I think, are going to come up in the case, and we'll see what happens. But I think CBS does have some defenses to this claim. So doesn't mean that they won't settle, though. Doesn't mean that, you know, there won't be some money coming out of this.
Okay, so Eric, do you think that CBS will settle? This was not done by the CBS News division. It wasn't done by 48 Hours or their news programs. This was done by an outside production house. So does CBS become less liable in that way?
I don't see why CBS would settle. If anything, this would make their programming much more wanted by the public. Because, like we said earlier, this young man, he's a public figure. He's done interviews on Dr. Phil and other shows have been made about this.
As far as we can tell, he's done one public interview, and this was a young man who was thrust in the spotlight at age 9 simply because his little sister was murdered. I don't know that that's willingly going into the public spotlight.
He is a public figure, being that he went on one of the top 10 shows in America, told his story, told his version of it, and everyone has been interested in this particular case. So
we have to leave it there, guys. Eric Guster and Jennifer Brandt, thank you so much for joining us. In the meantime, a Fox News alert, the White House issues a series of actions in response to Russian malicious cyber activity and also harassment. We'll go live to the State Department and also hear from House Speaker Paul Ryan, his response. Coming out just moments. News alert right now, the Obama administration issuing a series of sanctions against Russia. House Speaker Paul Ryan releasing a statement just moments ago, writing this, quote, Russia does not share America's interests. In fact, it has consistently sought to undermine them, sowing dangerous instability around the world. While today's actions by the administration is overdue, it is an appropriate way to end 8 years of failed policy with Russia, and it serves as a prime example of this administration's ineffective foreign policy that has left America weaker in the eyes of the world, end quote. Rich Edson joins us live from the State Department with reaction from there on a very busy day. What is the State Department saying, if anything yet, about House Speaker Paul Ryan's response?
Well, Heather, what the State Department is saying now is its component of all of this is it's announcing that 35 Russian diplomats operating with the United States have to leave the U.S. within 72 hours. This is part of that response to what the Obama administration has charged was Russian hacking and Russian influence or an attempted influence into the U.S. presidential election. And what the State Department quotes is that these 35 diplomats were operating in the United States in a manner inconsistent with their diplomatic or consular status. Now, the State Department says it wasn't only for this hacking or alleged interference in the U.S. election, but it also has to do with a number of other types of steps that the Russian government has taken overseas when it comes to U.S. diplomats operating in Russia. The State Department cites that the Russian government has harassed U.S. officials and diplomats, saying that there have been arbitrary police stops, physical assault. Russian state television has included some personal information about Americans, according to the State Department, that they say puts U.S. diplomat at risk. And so what typically happens whenever countries have an argument with one another or people or officials are acting in a certain manner within your country and they're diplomats of another country, you kick them out. And this is what the U.S. is doing here. So we now await for a response from the Russian government to see if they will retaliate and if American folks will come home.
We just got word in that the upper house of parliament referred to this, the United States response, as, quote, the death throes of political corpses. I guess they mean the outgoing Obama administration, the death throes of political corpses. All right, Rich Edson bringing us the latest from the State Department, the reaction on the sanctions against Russia, that new round of sanctions for the cyber hacking. Rich Edson, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Time for some headlines. The wreckage of a Texas Army National Guard helicopter that crashed into Galveston Bay yesterday during a routine training mission has now been removed from the water. The 2 soldiers on board were killed. A Buffalo school board is voting right now on whether the co-chairman of President-elect Donald Trump's New York campaign should leave the board. Carl Palladino made comments about President Obama and the First Lady, which some lawmakers call disrespectful and repulsive. And the man who invented the red Solo Cup has now passed away. Former Solo Cup Company CEO, chairman, Robert Holtzman was 84 years old. What an invention. And fans are flocking to the Atlanta Zoo, hoping to get their first peek at twin pandas born in September. The public viewing area is open about 5 hours a day, but it's up to the mom whether she wants to bring her cubs out. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you back here.